Hello everyone and welcome to the Unanswered Questions True Crime Podcast.
I have spent hours and hours investigating this.
He basically told her that people have been killed. Journalists, independent investigators, people like that disappeared. It frightened her to the bone.
There's more to the story than meets the eye.
There were rumors of torture and homicide and sexual abuse, all sorts of egregious, horrendous crimes.
He was polygraphed 3 times. Each of those 3 showed evasions.
His resumes were a skeleton of truth.
He was mad at the world, and particularly mad at the government.
The study that he commissioned had described a fictional terrorist attack.
If people have died over this, it means you're getting close to the truth.
You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to say, what the fuck?
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of my new podcast, Unanswered Questions, where every week we will endeavour to discuss a mysterious unsolved case that has many lingering unanswered questions. So I hope you enjoy, and as always, leave me some feedback on what you think about the show and rate it as well. Now on to the show. This week we'll be talking about Gregg Meissner. Gregg Meissner, 18, was hanged in his bedroom in the Meissner family home in Hawley, Minnesota in the early hours of January 5th of 1998. Between $40 to $70 was missing from his wallet. At 8 a.m, Sharon Meissner returned home from working the night shift at a retirement center to find her beautiful boy, who had been asleep in bed when she left the house, fully dressed but barefoot and strung up like a piece of meat on his closet door. She touched his leg and he came tumbling down on top of her. That's when she saw that his hands were tied behind his back. She phoned 911 and told them, and I quote, "Somebody's murdered my baby," end quote. Clay County Detective Brian Green didn't even wait for the coroner to arrive before proclaiming Gregg's death as a suicide. Police went to the high school to inform students that Gregg committed suicide even before Sharon's husband Steve, who was away on business, could be reached with the news. By 10:30 a.m, the Meissner home was flooded with hysterical teenagers. Sharon attempted to get the police to seal off the scene, but they refused to do so, unbelievably telling her, quote, "This wasn't television," end quote. They also refused to take prints, and when she discovered unexplained vomit in Gregg's toilet, she told them she hadn't flushed and that she was sorry, but she didn't want to destroy evidence. Detective Green totally ignored her, pleading to take it out. Among the spectators the police allowed to contaminate the crime scene was Shawn Padden, who was 23 years old. Although Gregg's parents didn't know it at the time, Padden, an acquaintance of Gregg's who had moved to Hawley just 4 months earlier, had been involved in criminal activities that local law enforcement was well aware of. In fact, just 3 days earlier, to escape prosecution for manufacturing of a controlled substance, drunken disorderly conduct, and assaulting Special Agent Tom Taylor, Padden had signed a secret agreement with Detective Green to work for the sheriff's office as a confidential drug informant. Over the next few days, a number of teenagers contacted both Gregg's parents and the police with information implicating Padden in Gregg's death. Among those was a girl who signed a written statement that Padden had once, and I quote, said that he killed some guy by hitting him in the back of the head and knocking him out. Then he tied something around his neck and hung him, left him to hang and left a suicide note. He printed it on the computer so they couldn't trace his handwriting. He said that Gregg drove him there, but he didn't know anything about it. He was into horror movies, Scream, and Last Summer. He said he wanted to do that, kill people and be mysterious. He said that he could take a human life and not feel remorse about it. He said that he would go over to Girls Redacted House, kill her right now and not feel sorry about it. That's someone that he loved. He was always asking me if he looked psycho. He wanted to scare people. He said that if he wanted to kill someone, he would hang them and knock over a chair and make it look like a suicide. End quote. He told her that he had done that once himself and gotten away with it. Quote, then in a completely clear and serious voice, he said, "How do you know I didn't do it? How do you know I wasn't the one who killed Gregg? I could have, you know." He said it with no waver in his voice, like someone who had been crying would have done. One night on the phone, we were talking about the past. I asked him about this because he never told me anything. And he said, "If you knew about my past, you would hate me. I've done some terrible things." And I was just talking to him and asking him to tell me one thing, and he said, "Fine, I killed someone. Are you happy? Don't say anything to anyone." That same day, Shawn showed me the pic from the internet. He told me he had freaked Gregg out. He said he brought Gregg into his bedroom and he had a chair pushed up against his closet door and he told Gregg to stand on it. Then he put a rolled up towel around Gregg's neck and pushed the chair out from under him. He said he let him down and Gregg was mad and left. He was mad that Shawn had done that to him. Shawn was laughing when he told me. He thought it was funny. End quote. Even more serious was another girl who told police that Padden had bound her wrists, blindfolded her, and threatened to kill her. Quote, Over and over, he has lines from it memorized. Another night when I was at his house, he said he had a surprise for me. He brought me into his bedroom and tied a necktie around my eyes so I couldn't see. Then he wanted to tie my hands behind my back. I told him no, I didn't want my hands tied. He tied them anyway, but in front of me. He didn't tie them normal. He tied one hand first, then the other, then he tied them both together. He said it was when you struggle, it is impossible to get them undone. I got mad and I took the tie off my eyes and I was trying to get my hands undone. I could only get as far as getting them apart. Both were still tied and connected by the necktie. Shawn called Monday, January 5th around 8 p.m. He told me he went over to Meissner's and he saw Gregg. He described the room saying he saw Gregg hanging by the closet with his clothes on, even shoes but no socks. He said there was a chair tipped over. He was sort of crying and saying it was his fault and that he had let this happen to Gregg. End quote. A third girl who alleged that she had been sexually assaulted by Padden said Padden had bragged to her that he had been at Gregg's house after Sharon had left for work at midnight and that he was the last person to see Gregg alive. Two other teenagers told police that about a month earlier, Gregg had visited Padden's apartment and Padden had thrown something around his neck and dragged him over a door. They said Chris Hawkins, 25, Padden's best friend and next-door neighbour, was there at the time and did nothing but watch. During the viewing at the funeral home, Gregg's mother noticed that Gregg's hair had been parted on the wrong side. When she pushed it over to the left, she discovered a scabbed wound on the top right side of his head. She screamed and pointed it out to the people around her. Gregg had apparently been knocked unconscious before he was strung up. That evening, officials from 3 different law enforcement agencies came to the Meissner home to inform Gregg's parents that they had interviewed Padden. While denying that he had anything to do with Gregg's death, Padden had described to police the hanging incident from a month earlier, except that his story was that Gregg had stood on the chair to hang himself and that Gregg had come up with the idea and enjoyed doing it. When Gregg's parents told police about the wound they discovered on Gregg's head, Special Agent Pete Graber from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension told them the wound had most likely occurred during the autopsy. Gregg's mum informed him that she knew from classes in nursing that people don't bleed and scab after they'd been dead for 36 hours and put in refrigeration. Not one officer went to look at the wound, and the autopsy report gave the cause of death as accidental. 2 weeks later, Graber and Green finally returned to the Meissner's home to get the chair on which Gregg supposedly stood with bare feet when he hanged himself. They used that opportunity to try and get Gregg's mum to state that she had seen rope burns on Gregg's neck on other occasions. She told them over and over that never ever did she see a rope burn on her son's neck. Graber's report, interestingly enough, of that interview states, Sharon Meissner noticed rope burns on Gregg's neck summer of '97. End quote. A few days later, while cleaning Gregg's room, Gregg's mother Sharon discovered an open bottle of Mountain Dew soda pop in a cubicle of his desk. The bottle contained 2 Marlboro Red cigarette butts. Gregg did not smoke. She called Police Chief Mark Hansen to her home to give him this new piece of evidence. When she tried to point out to Hansen the places where Steve and her had touched the bottle, he said, and I quote, "Don't worry about that," and proceeded to pass the bottle back and forth between his ungloved hands. "Now my prints are on it too." End quote. Hansen told them this with a smile. Sharon literally beat her head against the wall, at which point both parents were again informed that a real police investigation, quote, "is not like it's done on TV," end quote. On February 27th, police directed the forensic lab to cancel the testing of the clothing that Gregg was wearing when he died and to cancel tests on the vomit sample from his toilet. Their explanation to his parents for this was that vomit doesn't contain DNA, although an attorney told them it most certainly does. At Padden's trial, Agent Graber perjured himself by stating under oath that the lab did DNA tests on the vomit with negative results. Now we get into Agent Peter Graber testifies at Shawn Padden's trial that he had the lab do DNA testing on the vomit from Gregg's bathroom. Question: during the investigation, was there vomit found in the Meissner residence? Answer: yes sir, there was. Question: where was that? Answer: in the bathroom area. Question: and did you attempt to get this analysed at the lab? Answer: yes sir, we did. Question: what was the result? Answer: it was negative. End quote. On May 18th, police also withdrew their request for latent print examination of the chair, so there was no way of knowing whether Gregg did or didn't stand on it. On June 3rd of 1998, Shawn Padden was indicted on 3 charges of third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. In other words, the grand jury's finding was that Padden didn't mean to kill Gregg, he just put him in a dangerous situation in which he accidentally died. Steve phoned Sheriff Larry Costello and demanded to know what went wrong. Why was Padden not charged with first-degree murder? Costello said there simply wasn't enough evidence. Gregg's parents were stunned by that statement. There was plenty of evidence if police had actually bothered to collect it. Not only had they not taken prints from the chair or allowed the lab to process the vomit for DNA, but they later learned that all the prints on the Mountain Dew bottle, not only those of Gregg's killer or a possible accomplice, but those of Steve and Sharon's and Chief Hanson's, had mysteriously vanished. The only prints on that bottle were those of Detective Green, who hadn't even been there when the evidence was collected. With Padden's trial coming up, Detective Green and Agent Graber and Chief Hanson once again tried to pressure Sharon Meissner into testifying that she saw rope burns on Gregg's neck in 1997. She refused to commit perjury, and 2.5 weeks before the trial, at the suggestion of Sheriff Costello, Graber launched an unfounded and embarrassing investigation of Steve and Sharon Meissner for bribing and/or threatening witnesses. Now we get into the deposition of BCA agent Peter Graber in regard to the investigation of the Meissners for bribing and or threatening witnesses. Quote, "You testified a few moments ago that you looked into some concerns expressed about Mr. and Mrs. Meissner possibly intimidating witnesses, correct? Answer, yes, sir. Question, and nothing came of that investigation? There were no charges brought? Answer, correct. Question, and as far as you could tell, they cooperated with you during the investigation? Answer, absolutely. Question, they didn't impede the investigation in any way, did they? Answer, no sir, they did not. Question, did you ever have any discussion about this case with Sheriff Costello of Clay County? Answer, Sheriff Costello had an interest in it, and I know that Detective Green was talking to him on a regular basis. The alleged witness tampering, he's the one that said we should look into it." End quote. That bogus investigation was quickly closed down by Graber's boss, SAC Terry Smith. Quote, "Case closed. SAIC Smith and Chief Hanson conferred following the interviews and agreed that the Meissners represented no serious threat to anyone and had merely been expressing the kind of feelings of frustration and anger which are often expressed by surviving family members of one who has died in a violent manner." End quote. On November 9th of 1998, Padden was found guilty as charged. He was sentenced to 25 years and will be eligible for parole in 16 2/3 years. His attorney filed an appeal based on the fact that Padden was inappropriately convicted of third-degree murder when evidence indicated he was guilty of first-degree murder. The appeal was rejected. In a last-ditched attempt to unearth the truth about Gregg's murder, Steve and Sharon Meissner filed a wrongful death suit against Padden. In preparing for that case, their private investigator was able to depose Detective Green, Chief Hanson, Agent Peter Graber, and Padden's buddy Chris Hawkins. Although Hanson continued to deny any knowledge that Green had enlisted Padden as a confidential informant, Green stated that Hanson was the one who came up with the idea and turned over the contract that he and Padden had signed 3 days prior to Gregg's murder. Quote, question, "Were you aware, Chief, of any role Detective Green played or had with Shawn Padden in connection with any kind of informant activity?" Answer, no, none. End quote. For his part, Chris Hawkins provided information that implicated Padden in an assisted suicide by hanging in another state. Now we get into the deposition of Chris Hawkins, Shawn Padden's best friend. Question, do you have any information that has changed your view at all as to whether Mr. Padden may or may not have committed this offence or been involved in it? Answer, yeah, what I found out about Colorado. Question, what is it you found out about Colorado? Answer, like I said before, just that he was involved in a case there. He was tried, I think he was tried because one of his friends had died. I'm not sure. I think they said that he was tried for helping him commit suicide or something. End quote. Further investigation revealed that there were 2 mysterious hanging deaths of young men who bore a physical resemblance to Gregg in the Elizabeth and Castle Rock areas of Colorado while Padden was living there. When presented with the names of those victims, Padden quickly agreed to settle the Meissner's civil suit out of court. But the horror story doesn't end there. There's also one other little hitch to this story and one other little wrinkle to the story that no one has ever gotten to the bottom of, although various people have tried. Gregg's parents tried, various other people have tried, but it all just ended up going nowhere. Gregg was accidentally buried in the wrong plot, and in October of 2002, Gregg's parents were forced to move his body to a new location. That provided them with an unexpected opportunity to obtain information about the nature of Gregg's head wound. They had a second autopsy performed in San Bernardino, California by a team of 5 experts headed by forensic pathologist Dr. Monica Rollinger. Dr. Tamara Sinclair, a former forensic psychologist who had taken a personal interest in Gregg's case, was present as well. Gregg's body was too badly decomposed to provide information about the head wound, but it did disclose something so shocking that even the doctors were stunned. Many of Gregg's organs were missing and his brain had been scooped out. Monica Rollinger told Gregg's parents the cavities had been filled in with kitty litter. Now we get into the documentation on this. Quote, internal examination. Body cavities. There are no rib fractures noted. The chest and abdominal cavity contains autolyzed internal organs mixed with grey-black granular material used to prevent leakage. Portions of brain, heart, muscle, and intestines are recognized. Neck. Examination of the neck shows the neck organs to be completely absent, most probably from the first autopsy, and the area is replaced with paper towel. What remains is the cervical vertebra, which appears to be intact and unremarkable. Head. Examination of the head reveals no evidence of trauma. No fractures are observed in the calvarium. The brain is absent and the dura has been stripped off. There is no evidence of basal skull fractures. No meaningful interpretation of the findings is possible due to advanced decomposition and absence of many of the organs, particularly the neck organs. End quote. Gregg's organs weren't harvested for transplant, even if Gregg's parents had granted permission, which they didn't. Those organs were useless to others since the autopsy wasn't performed until at least 34 hours after death. In his official report, Dr. Michael McGee, Ramsey County Medical Examiner, recorded taking hair samples, fingernail clippings, blood, and a tissue sample from Gregg's liver, but certainly not his organs and brain. The office of the medical examiner was at the time trying to track down the missing parts of their son. Success didn't seem very likely after almost 5 years, and even if somebody did present them with an assortment of organs, how could the parents possibly know that they were their son Gregg's? A DNA lab report wouldn't have confined them, as it could easily be just as invalid as the fabricated information in the police reports. Now we come to the April 2004 update in the case. In January 2003, Gregg's parents reported to Clay County Sheriff Bill Berquist that a second autopsy showed that Gregg's body was missing organs. Dr. Michael McGee, who performed the original autopsy at Ramsey Medical Center in St. Paul, Minnesota, stated in his report that he took only hair, fingernail clippings, blood, and a tissue sample from the liver. There is a denial of removal of organs in his report. He allegedly told Sheriff Berquist that he destroyed everything that was taken at the autopsy 3 years after the autopsy, which is standard operating procedure, or SOP. Sheriff Berquist told the parents that Dr. McGee was now their county coroner and said he would talk to him. 1 week later, he confirmed that Dr. McGee continued to deny removing any of Gregg's organs and said that he only took a small tissue sample from Gregg's neck. Now, that's interesting because according to the doctors who performed the second autopsy, examination of the neck shows the neck organs to be completely absent, most probably from the first autopsy, and the area is replaced with a paper towel. End quote. Sheriff Berquist promised Gregg's parents he would send them a letter confirming the contents of his conversation with Dr. McGee. According to Gregg's parents, however, he did not do so. Oddly enough, soon after Berquist's conversation with Dr. McGee, Dr. Monica Rollinger, the forensic pathologist who headed the team of experts who performed Gregg's second autopsy, became unreachable. Rollinger's business private autopsy went out of existence. The 2 thorough certified reports and over 100 photos from the autopsy, which had been promised to Gregg's parents and would have documented Gregg's missing organs, were not sent to them. Their letters, email, and phone calls were not answered. The biggest question of Gregg's parents then and now is, who could have gotten to Dr. Monica Rollinger immediately after Dr. Michael McGee was informed by the sheriff that they were aware that Gregg's organs had been stolen? To this day, Gregg's murder remains stipulated as a suicide. Shawn Padden got away with what appears to be murder concealed as a suicide and was also responsible for other mysterious and suspicious hangings that he also very well may have gotten away with, the adage being that you aren't caught for every crime you may have committed. The more disturbing part about this case is Gregg's missing body parts and why they were taken and where they ended up, which has never been explained, and to this day, they still remain missing. With that, this case remains open, but with many unanswered questions, it still remain unanswered. Please rate the show and let me know what you guys think about this and the many other cases I've covered. You can follow me on all major social media platforms, YouTube, BitChute, Dailymotion. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. Links are all down below in the description. If you have a case you'd like me to have a look at or cover, don't hesitate to send me a message. I'm your host, and this has been the Unanswered Questions podcast. Until next time. Next on Unanswered Questions. On August 22nd of 2011, a woman named Gladys Sherby came to visit her son Corey Sherby in Chilliwack, British Columbia in Canada. No one answered her doorbell that day, or knocks for that matter. Then Gladys remembered that she had a copy of the keys to her son's house and decided to enter on her own. What she saw inside left a scar in her heart for life and later launched a dark and mysterious conspiracy theory on the internet which still has no answers.